Oh, the perils of not knowing my sin. Oh, the sadness that comes into life for those who have not tasted the sadness of knowing their sin. Oh, the pain that comes into the soul and the marriage and the family and the church where we have not felt the pain of knowing our sin.
We usually don't think of sorrow over our sin as a gift, do we? But it really is. I'm Dan Kruver. In this episode of Light and Truth, John Piper reminds us that when we lose sight of our sin, we lose something very vital. And that loss shows up in our hearts, our homes, our churches. This message was originally delivered at Bethlehem Baptist Church on April 1st, 2001.
What's his answer to his question? Is the law sin? His answer is no. May it never be, he says, very strong. May it never be. He goes further at the end of the paragraph, verse 12, puts it positively. So then, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Now, think about good and righteous. Holy, righteous, good. The law is that. As I pondered that Friday, it hit me, there's one other place, only one, in all of Paul's writings where he puts good and righteous together. Ring any bells? We've been there. Chapter 5, verse 7, where he says, one will hardly die for a righteous man. Yet, perchance, one might even die for a good man. Righteous, good. Righteous, good. What does that mean? What's the difference between a righteous man and a good man? Why would you maybe die for a righteous man, but really probably die for a good man? What's that? Is it something like this? When you consider a person for his righteousness, you mainly consider him for his doing what's right and correct, keeping the rules, and making sure his life conforms to a standard. And that's good. You might admire a man like that, keeps his life right in line, enough to die for him. But then it says, but you'd be more inclined to step up and suffer and die for a man who was good. So, what's that? More than that? Well, we all know what that is. We all know people who orient off of standards and orient off of rules and do a pretty good job of it. And frankly, we don't like some of them. Because what's missing, perhaps, now I'm creating a conflict here that is not in Paul's mind, I don't think. I think he thinks these two things can go exactly side by side with no conflict. But there is another way of coming at reality than rule keeping. And that is person nurturing, caring. A good person is good to you. In other words, they don't just think, now, what's the right thing to do here? But they like the right thing because they know it's good for you. Right things, when God speaks them, are good for you. And they like it for that reason as well as the fact that it's right. And the goodness comes out and you feel it. You feel it coming through their obedience to God. They care about you. They care about you. And they're good. Okay. Now, if I'm on the right track at 5:7, let's bring it over to 7:7. or 7:12. What does it mean when he says, the law is not sin, and not only is it not sin, it is holy, which means, yes, it's high and separated and pure and reflecting the absolute perfections of God. And it's right. It accords with all that is right and true and correct. And more. It's good. It's good. It's good for you. Good. So, Paul cares about what we think about the law. Cares about it. He wants you to experience the law as a standard. He wants you to experience the law as high and reflecting God's greatness and separate perfection from all that is sin and impure. And He wants you to taste, this is good. This is good for you. Sandwiched between verse 12, the positive, and verse 7, the negative. No, it's not sin. Yes, it's holy, righteous, and good. Is an argument. So here's my first observation. I'm only going to make one today. No, the law is not sin. Why? Beginning of the argument. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law. For I would not have known about coveting if the law had not said, you shall not covet. Here's my observation. We need to know our sin. And it's important to know our sin. Now, the reason I infer that from this verse is because the argument won't work if that's not true. The argument says, is the law sin? No. Why do you say no? You've just said so many negative things about it. Sounds like you think it's sin. No, it's not sin, because I wouldn't know sin if it weren't for the law. To which somebody might say, who cares if you know sin? Why would you want to know sin anyway? Now, if that's the answer you give, the argument won't work. But if it seems to you important that you know your sin, then the argument holds some water. If it's really important, if it's good for me, good to know my sin, then it's an argument that's going to work. So here's my one point today. We need to know our sin. That's all. It's important for you to know your sin, not mine. For me to know mine, not yours. It's important for me to know my sin. My sin, not sins, not the list. The being, the corruption, the power that produces those little things out there. That's not the big problem. Those actions are not the big problem. I'm the problem. And I need to know me. I need to know me. Oh, the perils of not knowing my sin. Oh, the sadness that comes into life for those who have not tasted the sadness of knowing their sin. Oh, the pain that comes into the soul and the marriage and the family and the church where we have not felt the pain of knowing our sin. Oh, the self-destruction that comes to us when we have not experienced the self-devastation of knowing our sin. Oh, the eternal loss of the soul that has not lost its pride through the knowledge of sin. This is good for us. It's important, really important, for you to know your sin today. It's important for your marriage to know your sin, not her sin. Sin is mainly reflected in marriages by being more interested in the sin of your spouse than your own. That's the main manifestation of sin. It'll heal marriages to be broken. It'll heal parenting to be broken. It'll heal churches to be broken. People who know their own sin, they're healers. They're healers. Hurts and heals. You know one of the biggest evidences in this room right now that there's sin here? There's lots of them. But here's one. Some of you right now are thinking, the pastor just told us to experiment with sin. Get acquainted with your sin. No sin. Try a little internet nudity. Try a little fornication. Lie a little. Steal a little something to see what it feels like. Get to know it. That's what he said. That's an evidence of sin in this room. Somebody is actually going to walk out of here and say, I said that. Because here's the way it works. Here's the way it works. See, sin is sub-rational and therefore powerful beyond the mind. Inexplicable, irrational, taking the mind captive, making the mind justify what it wants, so that our minds become the lackey of this power. So we think what our sin wants us to think until there's a liberating power that comes into our lives. And we will actually use our brains to distort reality to justify sinful desires. Well, I didn't say it, and I don't mean it, and it's now on the tape. Do not experiment with sin to get to know sin. There's a better way. Let me use a parable to say it. Parable. And what I'm doing here is answering the question, well, don't you have to be a sinner? I mean, do some sins and get to know sin like you ought to know it? I say, well, that's not a problem. No. Once there were 3 men standing before a pit. The pit is the pit of lust. Women, you make the necessary adjustments. I'm going to talk about men. Tied around their waist is a cord. 100-pound test cord. The cord goes into the pit. The pit looks very attractive. And it's deadly. Snakes at the bottom of the pit. It's the pit of lust, the pit of pornography, the pit of internet nudity. It's a click away from everybody. The first man begins to feel the rope, the cord, pulling him toward the pit. And he resists. 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds. Digs in his heels. 30 pounds. He says, no. 35 pounds. Tightens up. He gives up resisting, jumps into the pit. Click. The second man begins to feel the cord pulling on him around his waist. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Digs in his heels, resists. No, he says. 40, 45, 50 pounds. No. Leans back. Starts to tighten. Makes his breathing more difficult. 50, 55 pounds. No. 60. Quits resisting. Jumps in. Click. The third man begins to be pulled. 5, 10, 15, 25, 30 pounds. Digs in his heels. Resists. No, he says out loud. No. 40, 45, 50. Starts to tighten. His breath is being cut off. No! He leans back. He cries out for help. Help! He sees a branch. Grabs a branch. Shaped like a cross. The branch is shaped like a cross. 65, 70. And off across the field, in his mind's eye, as through a haze, he sees his wife going about her work, trusting him. Over on that side, he sees his children playing happily, and in their hearts, admiring him. And then he lifts up his eyes to the horizon, and he sees Jesus with a big gash in his side. And his hands are lifted. And his fists are formed. And there's a big smile on his face. 85, 90, and the cord starts cutting into his side. No. And he looks up. 95, 100. Snap. No click. Now here's my question. Which of these three men knows the power of sin? If this were a sermon on lust, I would, at this point, lift up my voice and scan this congregation and shout, "Are there any soldiers here? Anybody got blood in his shirt? Show me some scars before you talk about the power of sin. Don't show me your broken ankles at the bottom of the pit. I want to see blood." But it isn't a sermon on lust. So I'll skip that. And go back to the point. All I'm doing with that little parable is answering the question, don't you need to sin more to know how sinful you really are? And the answer is no. You don't. In fact, the wimps who give in at 30 and 60, they don't know. They think they know. Call it bondage. They'll even use words like fall. You'll notice I did not use the word fall. I said jump. You don't fall on a mouse. You didn't fall. You jumped. And you jumped at 25 pounds and you don't have a scar on your body. Come on. No. It's not a sermon on lust. So, it's good for us to know our sin. It's good for us. And the law is given to help us know our sin. Why is it good for us? Why is it precious? Why did I say there's a sadness that comes from not knowing it, and there's a pain that comes from not knowing it, and there's a self-destruction that comes from not knowing it, and there's an eternal loss that comes from not knowing it? Why do I say it is precious to know our sin? Next Sunday is Palm Sunday. You know what I see on Palm Sunday? I see people waving palm branches. Hail, King of the Jews. And on Friday, crucify him, crucify him. Where'd that come from? What is the explanation for that? Answer, sin. The reason those stories are written is so that we might know ourselves. We're there. We're there with branches in our hands. And we're there with crucify him when we click. Because He died to purify our minds. And every click is a sword thrust. We're there. This is a Palm Sunday issue. But I close just by saying again, it's good for us. It's important for us that we know our sins. Let me say it again. Mine, not yours. I'm not snooping for you. I'm snooping for me. I am on a search for John Piper's sinfulness. I want to know me. I want to hate that about me which does not conform to the goodness and the righteousness of God. I want to be broken before my wife so I don't treat her harshly. I want to be broken before my little 5-year-old so that I have more patience. This is good for us. If you know your sin, not mine, not the person next to you, not your spouse or that crabby person at work, but your sin, if you know your sin, it'll be so good for you, so good for your marriages, so good for your friendships, if you know them forgiven. And Jesus becomes precious to you. And I'll close with this, because when I thought of getting to this point in the message, I thought, sometimes I hear people talk at Bethlehem about some of the language we use. Like, why do you folks talk in terms of treasuring Jesus and cherishing Jesus and delighting in Jesus and loving Jesus? I mean, this makes me feel the willies, What do you talk about? You know why? We know our sin. If you know your sin and your hopelessness and your corruption, not just that you do a few wrong things, but you are wrong. You're corrupt. At the center of your being, you've got a nature that is bad. And suddenly you learn the whole gospel is about a God who has found a way to be righteous and justify people like us. Acquit them. Adopt them. You grope for language for that Christ. You grope for language. You don't settle on some old-fashioned words that are just worn out in your own head, let alone everybody else's. You grope for, oh, Christ, how can I treasure you? How can I cherish you? How can I delight in you? That's why.
This is Light and Truth, God-centered preaching to help you see Christ clearly and treasure Him truly. I'm your host, Dan Kruver. Thank you for listening. On our next episode, John Piper concludes our 7-part series, The Christian's Freedom, with a message titled, What God's Law Does. I hope you'll join us. For more resources, visit desiringgod.org.